Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Julian Treasure, five-time TED speaker, expert on sound and communication skills, author of Sound Business and the award-winning How to Be Heard, several things, founder of the Sound Agency and an international keynote speaker on the skills of conscious listening and powerful speaking. Many things, Julian. Welcome to the show.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. It's lovely to be live as well.
Thank you. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India. And I'm sure you are writing on your new book, Everything is Sound. I don't know if it's been published. We'll talk about that too. And so a lot of people will benefit. You are a very known person. Your 5 TEDcom talks have been viewed over 150 million times, including the 6th most viewed TED talk of all time. That means I don't have to introduce you. You can introduce me. I don't have that capacity to introduce you, but here I am trying to do that job. So my first question to you, Julian, is to understand. You talk about the power of listening, power of talking, power of speech. Long back, somebody said that power flows out of the barrel of guns. How much of, and he talked about political power mainly, but in a general sense, how much of this power comes out of our throat? How does that work?
Well, it's a huge amount, of course. We've been using complex language for something like 200,000 years. Writing was only invented 5,000 years ago. And in fact, in your country, there's a long oral tradition which persists in classical music, for example, where there's no written music at all. So, you know, if you're learning tabla, you sit at the feet of your guru who goes da 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 da, and you remember it. So you have to listen very carefully. Well, we've lost that tradition in many countries. We don't teach speaking or listening in schools. How crazy is that? These things, these skills, and they are skills, not capabilities, they fashion our lives. They have a huge effect on the outcomes that we can achieve, on how we can persuade, enroll, inspire, make change in the world. It's very difficult to do anything entirely on your own. And it's far more powerful to speak to somebody face to face or on a stage using this amazing instrument we all play, the human voice, than it is to send them an email. So I think we've lost something here. We've lost contact with primal and really important skills, which most people now take for granted. You know, oh, that's just the voice I've got. Yeah, and I am listening to you while tapping away on a screen. Well, that's not listening. And your voice, everybody's voice, is an amazing instrument that you can learn to master and become an expert at, and it will change your outcomes in life.
Right, Julian, well said. So why have we lost that capacity to listen? Is it that we want to speak more? But how do you speak more when you don't listen? Help us understand this state of affairs for us, because everybody seems to be talking and doing less of listening.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, AJ. I mean, politicians go off and have talks. I wish they'd go off and have listens instead. I think the world would be a better place. You know, we've got two issues here. One is the hegemony of reading and writing. You know, we've fallen into this with email, text, screens. You know, we spend a huge amount of our lives. I mean, the majority of each day now we spend looking at a screen, and often it's one in our hand. Scott Peck said, you cannot truly listen to another human being and do anything else at the same time. Well, how often, dear listeners to this, how often do you put everything down and pay 100% of your attention to the person who's speaking to you? You know, we're in a mad world of multitasking, urgent things all the time, fear of missing out, you know, the old FOMO. I better check Twitter. Somebody might have, you know, Facebook, somebody might have tagged me, all that stuff. It gets in the way of giving our attention to the person we're actually with. There's a great book by Sherry Turkle called Alone Together, another TED speaker whom I know, and she's absolutely right. You know, technology, rather than bringing us together, is in many ways pulling us apart, at least from the people who are nearest and dearest to us. You know, we were replacing a few deep relationships with an awful lot of very shallow ones. And also technology, of course, is having a huge effect on listening in politics and in every aspect of life, because it's so easy to go out and validate whatever belief we have formed. There you are, I knew I was right. Thousands of people agree with me. Well, yes, but there are millions who don't, but you're not asking them. You're not looking for them. You're looking always for self-validation, for being right, which is a huge demand inside of us. Our ego wants to be right all the time. And the easiest way to be right is to make somebody else wrong. Hence, we have increasing polarization in politics. You see that in your country. I see it in mine. It's happening all over the world, unfortunately, where people are becoming less and less tolerant of divergent opinions, you know, and we do confuse opinions with facts an awful lot now. So we get entrenched and very attached to our opinions. Well, they're just opinions. Two people can have different opinions and both be right in their own worlds, given where they come from, what they believe, you know, their background, their circumstances. We don't have to agree with everybody. And in fact, it's very important to seek challenge, to seek diversity. Barack Obama said it in his acceptance speech. He said, "I will listen to you, especially when we disagree." Now, there's not a lot of that going on in the world now, unfortunately. And so this polarization can lead to, it's a slippery slope. It leads to dehumanization, caricaturing people we disagree with, demonizing them, and then violence, of course. And ultimately, you know, we're in the ISIS position of disagree with me and I'll kill you. Well, that's not a world I want my children growing up in. You know, I think listening is the sound of democracy. And if we stop listening to each other, it's impossible to keep civil society together in a peaceful way. So you get terrible things happening where neighbors start killing each other because they disagree. And we've seen that in countries around the world as well. So listening is so, so important and precious, and we need to preserve it.
Absolutely, Julian. Listening is so, so important. You have a book called, award-winning book called How to Be Heard in the Time when we are talking about how much talking people are doing, but not many are listening. So how to be heard. And to heard, you need to listen. To understand these things, you know, in a better way from you, let's look at three aspects. One is the political aspect you talked about. There we understand that, you know, we have more of politicians and lesser of leaders, and that is why it works for them when they don't listen but speak. And with the amount of support they have, they can drum up more, they can create that whole illusion of more support, and then the rest is history, as we can say in many parts of the world. But let's talk more about the business aspects, about the aspects of our general life. Let's go to business. You say that most organizations are terrible at listening and at creating appropriate sound. We know why you say that, but we would like to understand from you. And then how do they do this? How do they get better at listening? Especially there are so many organizations who are serious about it. You must be training a lot of people on this, and also at creating appropriate sound. What is this thing called sound? Is it about making noises? So many people keep on making noises, even in organizations, you know. So how do you create that right sound? Help us understand these two aspects of listening and creating the right sound, especially from a business perspective, how much it can benefit by doing these things that way. We want to understand from your perspective.
First of all, AJ, sound affects us all profoundly. And we've, again, lost contact with that because we've really stopped listening. We've become numb to the sound around us. The world is very noisy. Your country has got some very noisy places. I mean, there are cities in India which rank in the top 10 noisiest places in the world. And so when you are surrounded by that much noise, you tend to go numb and start suppressing your awareness of sound. Nevertheless, it is affecting you. It affects our bodies. You know, it gives us stress reactions or fight-flight responses, sudden or unpleasant noises. It affects our feelings. You know, you just think of the effect of music or beautiful sound or ugly sound on you. It really changes how you feel. It affects how well we can think. And that's a really big issue in modern offices, where noise is the #1 problem, because people trying to do solo working, concentrating, can't do it because there are people around them talking. We have no earlids. It's impossible not to listen to and decode somebody else's conversation, even if you don't want to. And it takes up cognitive bandwidth that otherwise you could use for your work. So we're around 1/3 as productive in noisy open plan offices as we would be in a quiet space a lot of the time for that kind of working. And then, of course, sound affects what we do. It affects how long we stay in a shop, for example, how long we stay in a showroom, how much we enjoy the experience of being in a restaurant, a hotel, a bar, or a house, or an office. So we can change what we do by changing the sound around us. Making it more pleasant will tend to make people stay in a space for longer. And that's something that retailers and shopping mall owners are only just starting to understand. You know, they've for a long time bombarded us with inappropriate, very low quality music, for example, or just created spaces which are noisy, reverberant, and really unpleasant to be in. And that's because architects spend all their time thinking about how things look. Very, very little time they spend on how things sound. They design with their eyes, not with their ears. So we have this noise around us, and it changes, you know, our feelings about brands. It changes our loyalty. It changes, you know, customer loyalty as well as staff loyalty as well. It changes staff retention rates. It changes productivity. These are incredibly important things. And yet the research, and it's not just me saying organizations are terrible at listening, the research shows they are. There was a big piece of research called the Organizational Listening Project. And fundamentally, it looked at big and small companies all over the world, and it found that they are terrible at listening. They claimed that they spent roughly 5 times as much time and money on sending. When you think of corporate communication, it's all outbound, isn't it? Advertising, PR, and so forth. It's outbound. And only 1/5 as much receiving and listening. And that was self-reported. So I would suggest that's an exaggeration, because we always like to think we listen better than we really do. Does it matter? Yes, it does, because the organizations ranked high in the listening in this survey had much more loyalty with their staff and their customers. They had greater profitability. The organizations ranked low in the listening stakes had more crises, more problems, more issues, and so forth. So it does have an effect on the bottom line, listening as an organization. And then, of course, there's designing. If you start listening, you can start designing sound that's appropriate and effective in every situation, whether it's your office workers, your customers in a retail setting or a hospitality setting, or your marketing, of course, where virtually the entire focus in marketing is on how things look. And very often they forget about how things sound. So sound is very powerful, and organizations are very poor at using it. And I would say this imbalance between sending and receiving is just a mirror of what we are like personally. So to give you an example, my TED Talk on speaking, which is the one that's the 6th most viewed of all time, has been seen by 5 times as many people as my TED Talk on listening. Now, that is very interesting. It's the same proportion as in companies. And I would suggest that's probably a pretty good yardstick for what's going on in the world. We're far keener to be heard than we are to listen. And to me, that's very dangerous, because you just end up with everybody shouting. My work is founded on the principle that speaking and listening are not a straight line relationship. It's not I speak, you listen. They are in a circular relationship, because the way you listen affects the way I speak affects the way you listen, and on and on. It's organic and it's circular. If you want to be a great speaker, it's very important to be a good listener as well. Otherwise, you're probably saying the wrong thing or in the wrong way, to the wrong people, and you won't have any results at all. I talk about speaking into a listening. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, with listening, it's very important to realize that every human being's listening is unique. Your listening is different from mine. Fundamentally, AJ, I would suggest, we're speaking the same language here, but we were born into different cultures. We learn to speak different languages. And those things really color our listening. Then there's the values, attitudes, beliefs that we pick up along the way from parents, teachers, role models, friends, whoever it might be. Then in any given situation, we might have different intentions or expectations, which change, the listening that we do, and emotions, and also assumptions about what's going on perhaps in the other person's head or whatever it might be. Well, those are all personal. So your listening is different from mine. Every person listening to this has got individual different listening. And it's even more complicated than that because listening changes over time as well. You listen in a different way when you're tired or angry or upset. So an audience, for example, I've done lots and lots of speeches all over the world, and I tend to get given what's called the graveyard slot, which is just after lunch. Because, he's a TED speaker, he can speak, he can cope with that. And everybody knows that's a bad slot because everybody's blood is in their gut. They've just had food, they're kind of chilled out, they're not really concentrating. So you really have to work harder with an audience in that slot. Well, there's a different listening from if you were on at 9 a.m. or 5 p.m. when they all want to go home. So, an audience's listening changes over time. So does a person, and it changes from audience to audience, from person to person. So you have to ask yourself a really critical question. What's the listening I'm speaking into? And if you ask that question of yourself, you'll start to become more and more sensitive to it, and your speaking will become more and more powerful and appropriate. So the two things are so related, so intimately related. And I said earlier, we've got two issues. One is the preference that we give to reading and writing to screens over speaking and listening. And the second is the preference we give to speaking over listening. Listening is right at the bottom of the pile. And to me, it's the most important skill that we have as human beings, because from conscious listening always comes understanding. And that's the future. If we're going to be living on this planet and making it work, we need to understand one another, even if we disagree.
Absolutely. Well explained, Julian. In fact, listening is the key to all communication. And the problem is that we don't listen. A lot of people don't listen. And the biggest complaint that we hear around in our personal lives, outside in general life, and even in offices is you are not listening. And
Absolutely.
that is bad. So in terms of businesses who are not listening enough, it means that your communication is going haywire because you have not listened enough. How will you create that talking point, what exactly people want to listen? So our topic is how to speak powerfully. Now it is not about that sort of a power, but in terms of communication. What would you suggest to leaders in the office setup, that their communication becomes powerful enough so that it actually achieves its intended purpose?
Well, first of all, I think speaking powerfully is, as you say, not so much about shouting at people. It's about understanding the listening you're speaking into and caring. I always tell when I'm training people on speaking on stage, for example, one of the most important things is it's not about you. It's not about getting affirmation and applause and having people think well of you. It's about the gift you're giving to the people you're speaking to. And once you get into that, it makes speaking publicly so much easier when you just remember, I've got a gift, I'm going to give it to you, you want it, we're all on the same side here, so let's get on with it. So that kind of, I talk about the foundations of powerful speaking being hail, honesty, H, authenticity, A, integrity, I, and love, L, hail. So those four things, and by love I don't mean romantic love, that is what I mean, well-wishing, just giving people gifts, remembering that that's what it's about. I think in politics, we've become, first of all, the audience has become short of attention span. We have much shorter. Once upon a time, politicians used to indulge in what was called oratory. They would read speeches for half an hour in the Houses of Parliament, and people would sit and listen to them, and it was elegant, and that people would then think about the response. Well, that's no longer the case. It's now sound bites. A politician, possibly if they're being interviewed, will only get a few words in before they're interrupted. Interrupting being a major disease that we have established in the media and in our social lives and private lives as well, probably. So they've become used to just get bullet points, tiny little sound bites which can't get interrupted. And they all come out prepared with their 3 sound bites. This is what's on message. This is what I'm going to put across. So you get I'm very glad you asked me that question, because I'm going to say this that I was going to say anyway. It's got nothing to do with the question you just asked me. So there's a kind of dishonesty or play acting going on. And politics has never been a profession where rigorous honesty has been highly valued. It's all about positioning, and it's all about messaging, and it's all about speaking to the converted a lot of the time and trying to convert the margin. We have this problem in my country, where I live in Scotland, where we've had a political party in power for many, many years that simply doesn't care about the majority who don't want independence. They speak to 47% who do, and they've been really, really rude about the 53% who don't. Well, that's no way to convert people. They're not listening to the opposition. And it's the same thing again, isn't it? So if you want to win as a politician, I would suggest start listening to the people who disagree with you and understand why. Validate them. I can see why you believe that. I don't agree with you, but I can see why you would believe that. Now let's see if we've got something in common, something that I can offer you. Otherwise, we end up, as we've just said, in this world of fragmentation, polarization, silos, ghettos of people with ever increasingly extreme views, conspiracy theories and really crazy ideas about what's going on, which is, it becomes increasingly difficult to have a democracy working in that situation. And particularly, democracy is always, you've got one party and you've got the opposition, or several opposition parties, and they seem to have an unwritten rule that it's not allowed to agree with the other side. Well, it's ridiculous. Of course, there are things the other side says that may be right and may be, proper. And why can't we have politicians listening to each other and saying, okay, well, I actually, we agree with those 3 points you've made, but this one, definitely not. It's not the way it is. It's got to be polarized. It's got to be extreme. It's got to be, they are wrong, we are right. And this right and wrong thing is so dangerous in the world, and it's becoming more and more powerful. So I do urge everybody listening to this just to check in with yourself and say, is this about me being right? Harville Hendricks, the American counselor and author, said a wonderful thing. He said, you can either be right or be in a relationship. And I think there's a lot of truth in that.
Absolutely, Julian. And whatever the state of the world is, or whatever ways the politicians are communicating or other leaders are communicating, your vision is to transform the world by inspiring people to listen consciously and speak powerfully. And that you are doing so very well with your speeches, with your training, with your TED Talks. And you're also talk about the Vocal Toolbox. Tell us about that, and what can people learn out of that Vocal Toolbox of yours? I guess it has a lot of things in that.
Yeah, well, the point of the Vocal Toolbox is that we don't realize we have it. Most people will assume this is just the voice I was given. Nothing I can do about it. And that's so not true. We have all these tools in the toolbox that we can play with and practice and become expert at using. So just some examples of them. Breathing, for example. There's a wonderful tradition of breathing in yoga, which comes from your wonderful country. And there are many, many people in the world who in a normal day will not breathe deeply once. at all. Well, our voice is just breath. And if we want to have powerful delivery, then it's great to have a breathing practice. And that's something which can change, your power of speaking enormously. Posture is another one. Strangely, you wouldn't think of a vocal toolbox including posture. But if I put my head forward, it strains my vocal cords. And if I put my head back, it goes like this. So we need to have good posture in order for our vocal cords to be working as well as they possibly can. And we spend a lot of time at work on a desk, leaning forward on the phone like this and stretching our vocal cords, which is not helping. But within the voice itself, of course, things like pitch, prosody or prosody, which is the up and down intonation we use, and the pacing of our speaking, so powerful in delivering a message more powerfully than it would be delivered if it were just written. I mean, this is the richness of voice. Would you rather see a play being acted or read it? That's the difference. It's enormous. And things like pace, how fast you speak and get really, really excited, or slow, right down. And it's very important to vary these things when you're speaking, because consistent kind of pacing and intonation, repeated intonation, for example, will send people to sleep. You'll kind of hypnotize people if you speak like this every sentence. And then the next sentence does this as well. And then every sentence is the same. People will get hypnotized pretty much and go to sleep. So variation, very important. And becoming a master of consciousness in where you are with your volume, for example. And most important of all, perhaps, your relationship with silence. A lot of people feel uncomfortable with silence, particularly if they're on stage. And the most common fault I see with people speaking on stage is gabbling, filling every instant with their voice. And that can give rise to the ums and ers and and all that kind of verbal tics that just get in the way of the message. Well, I mean, I've stood on stage and stopped for a minute just to see what happens. That's a very, very, very long time to stand in silence in front of 1,000 people. And the answer is nothing happens, because I look confident and calm, and they're all thinking, oh, that's nice, a bit of peace. I wonder what I might have for lunch. And, we all have a little break. It's no problem to stop for a few seconds. And of course, the biggest nightmare people have about public speaking is forgetting what you're going to say. And if that happens, I've seen it happen many times to people on stage. They stop. Well, if you retain calm and you just say to the audience, ladies and gentlemen, I'm terribly sorry. I've completely forgotten where I am. Would you give me a moment while I just consult my notes? Then what tends to happen is that people in the audience will applaud, or they'll be with you. You get sympathy, and it's not a problem. So no need to go red, get flustered, start breathing, sweating, panic. It doesn't have to be that way, because the audience is on your side generally, as long as you're not in an open mic night in a comedy club or something. So, these things, the vocal toolbox is there for everybody. I've given many, many talks to large rooms full of CEOs. And I say to them, for how many of you is the voice very important in your work? And they all put their hands up, because they have to present and talk to the press and the media and so forth. Okay, how many of you have had formal vocal training? About 6 in a room of 1,000. I just go, what? What is going on with you guys? This is incredibly important. Becoming a master of this instrument, like a concert pianist, can radically alter your outcomes and your company's outcomes. And yet, you're just assuming that what you've got is what you've been given and there's nothing you can do about it. It's wrong. So again, my advice to anybody listening to this who has to sell, persuade, lead, inspire, and that would include parenting as well, is get some formal vocal coaching. Look on the internet, find a singing coach, a drama coach, a speaking coach, and try some out, find one you like and work with them. And they will transform this amazing instrument that you've been given, whatever it is you've been given, they will maximize it for you. And that's really important.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Julian. There is so much to, learn from you. And this is just, a half an hour podcast, you can only learn as much as this will be possible in this time. But for more, they will have to either come to you directly or read your books. The new one about the everything is sound, the other ones, how to be heard and sound business, all these things. And also tell us about, about the sound agency, so that people can learn more about sound, know more about sound, and how they can connect with you. What's the best way to do that, so that they learn more from you and also connect with you in a professional capacity.
Thank you, AJ. Well, if it's about you as an individual, then juliantreasure.com is where to come, because my work there is all about powerful speaking and conscious listening as an individual. If it's about a company, then the sound agency is where to go, because we do the same thing fundamentally for organizations, where we design things like sonic logos, for example. And you think of Intel, da 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 da. Not many people could draw the Intel logo, but most people recognize that sound. So sonic logos can be enormously powerful, or very much sound in spaces, retail spaces, hospitality spaces, creating sound that increases sales and increases customer satisfaction. So that's what the sound agency does, and that's thesoundagency.com. And yes, the books, actually everything is sound won't be out until 2025, the spring of 25, I think. And that's a book about the wonder of sound, which is being a lot of fun to write. It's full of wow things about sound in space, sound of the living things on our planet, sound of the earth itself, and the sound of us as human beings. So that will be out then. But how to be heard, yeah, that's the one about speaking and listening. And sound business is about the effective use of sound in every aspect of business. So I'd be delighted to hear from anybody at either juliantreasure.com or thesoundagency.com.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Julian gave us so much of information, so much of insight on sound, on listening right. And not to just make noises, but to actually make the right kind of sound till you are there on the planet, so that it changes lives on this planet and does not impact negatively. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thanks for having me, AJ.